We're going to take one of my real conversations and learn how we can make the language more athletic and artistic using 3 techniques that every articulate speaker understands. Here's a brief sample of the conversation.
Did you finish the book you were reading?
I did. On the flight home, I had an interesting thought that I was pursuing, inspired by the book, and is probably how I would describe it.
So you consider time not spent on technology wasted?
I don't know. I suppose my mind at least is convinced of that.
It's almost as if the amount of time...
That's a standard natural exchange of ideas. Nothing particularly wrong with the choice of words used. However, we're not here to speak ordinarily. What can we do to give my words flavor and freshness? Many of the greatest articulators we'll be studying throughout this video understand that language is something that you can make your own. You don't have to choose the obvious word paths that everyone pursues. The first way that we can achieve this kind of verbal athleticism is by using alliteration. Alliteration is the fun repetition of any consonant sound in 2 or more closely associated words. Listen to the following examples.
We groom and we graze together. He's an incredibly popular and populist figure.
Confident in the sanity and sobriety.
Authoritarian forces are abundant and abound.
Is determined and cannot be deterred.
Wishing to whistle their way up the aisle.
That fierce adolescent fire.
Alliteration is one of the main mechanics of sound responsible for generating rhythm in a sentence. I've meticulously studied the speakers from the clips we just reviewed and have identified a process for producing alliteration. Alliteration is not a decision that you make in advance. I'm going to employ alliteration in this sentence. No. Alliteration is something you weave into the fabric of your sentences because it feels natural. The first step many articulate speakers take is committing to memory alliterative phrases known as word couplings. This is remarkable if you can learn to understand this. The first word in these word couplings acts as a trigger for introducing the rest of the phrase. All you have to do is encounter the trigger word in your speaking, and the alliterative phrase is summoned and effortlessly falls into your sentences. In fact, here are 2 examples of this process happening to me.
How was the trip to Washington?
Washington was wonderful. Wonderful and wonder-filled. And here I am desperately attempting to find a solution. I begin scampering and scouting for possible angles that might provide relief.
Below this video, I'll link the list of alliterative phrases that I've assembled for myself. Beyond having a stock of phrases, you can learn to generate alliteration in real time. In fact, it starts with defining what I call the anchor. The anchor is the word that has potential alliterative properties that you want to influence your other words. For example, let's take the following sentence.
The weather was good?
The weather was rainy to be expected, yet amazing.
Now, of course, a sentence could function fine by itself. Or what I could do is single out that first adjective, rainy, use that as the anchor, and let that first letter, R, continue to ring through my mind as I search for a second adjective that begins with the letter R and hopefully has a similar meaning to what I wanted to convey, that being the idea that the weather was amazing. An adjective that meets those criteria could be refreshing. The weather was rainy to be expected, yet refreshing. Ideally, you'd want the words to be closer together, but even still, as distant as they are, it introduces a subtle poetic flavor to your sentence. The more you make a deliberate effort to seed your sentences with alliteration, the easier it becomes to effortlessly yoke words together. Alliteration for me has become a fun way of galloping through a sentence, letting the letters season the sentence. Often I don't even think about it anymore. Finally, I would add alliteration is not an excuse to be redundant with your words. You wouldn't photograph an animal twice from the same angle. Ideally, you capture multiple angles that each complement a different feature of the animal. In the same way, alliteration serves to capture different angles of an idea and often break a vague word into 2 or more distinct parts using that poetic touch. The next modification we're going to make is to use metaphor. Metaphor is a figure of speech that describes an object or action as if it were something else, typically bestowing upon something ordinary the qualities of something possessing heavy imagery. For example, mental landscape, intellectual joust, ideological cocktail, theater of your imagination, mosaic of information, army of snow, stormy attitude. It mushroomed into a viral trend. I can't digest what you're telling me. Other examples from popular films and public figures include,
Body's a loaded gun.
I'll have to agree with the walking thesaurus on that one.
I'm a dog chasing cars.
We're reminded all the time, everything casts a shadow.
Yeah.
Experiment until you find the vein of effectiveness.
That took us down some incredible avenues.
Jumpstarts our fear engine.
In each example, what's happening is an ordinary idea is being compared with something else and cast with a visual quality. Here's how I like to think about metaphors. This should help explain this. You have an idea you're attempting to sear into the mind of your listener. It might be a spontaneous burst of thought erupting in your mind for the first time in a conversation. Perhaps it's something you've thought of before. You have a choice between scavenging for the right words and often having to settle on a set of dull and dreary sentences that fall short of conveying your idea. Or you can invoke a metaphor and furnish your idea with depth and, most importantly, familiarity. That excites your listener. This shows verbal athleticism, your ability to build off of the common ground between you. Unlike alliteration, you don't want to memorize a stock list of phrases and then shoehorn them into your sentences. The objective with metaphor is to be agile and creative, athletic, as we say, with your language. Every one of us can construct a metaphor. We simply need to know how to direct our focus properly. Here's an example of me using a metaphor in the conversation for this video.
Actually, I had a headache the entire weekend. There was an absolute war raging in my head. I don't know if it was
The process I learned for producing metaphor involves asking yourself two questions. Question one, what characteristics does my idea have? The idea from the conversation we watched was a simple one, headache. What characteristics does headache have? Well, top of mind, headache has pain, pulsing, pounds. You might even throw in torture. We choose one. In the moment, I believe I was thinking pain. Now we ask the second question. What else has that characteristic? This is important to understand. This is so cool. Words are like musical notes. They have close relationships with other words, and they can, in a sense, belong to the same key. For example, let's try to think in the key of pain. What other words, preferably nouns, are in the same frame as the word pain? Those might be words such as wound, suffering, war, battlefield, stab, heartbreak. All these words are related to each other by virtue of their relationship to the key or frame of pain. In the conversation that we're analyzing in this video, I remember stepping through this and thinking pain. This happens very quickly, and you get good at asking these questions in less than a second. Certainly there were better options than pain that existed, and from pain, the characteristic I identified was war, which was the metaphor that I created. Like alliteration, the best metaphors aren't planned in advance. They come on what I would describe as a flare of inspiration. We stumble into metaphors through accidental words that unconsciously provide the tripwire.
I'm going to think of it now more as a receiver inside of you, right? Almost like tuning a radio.
He does not want to offend anyone. He doesn't gore anyone's sacred cow except on these narrow topics.
For instance, I'll observe people who shamelessly litter or throw paper towels on the floor at the gym and wonder how many of these micro acts of desecration does it take? How many times do you have to be the vandal in the art gallery until you've eroded every sense of responsibility?
The final modification we're going to make to our language is to season our sentences with some classical flavoring. Some time ago, I made a list of the particular words and expressions that I noticed were common denominators in nearly every articulate speaker in the last 50 years. Absorbing these words into your vocabulary can very magically and instantly give your communication an aesthetic of class and curiosity. Here are several examples of these words and expressions. Perhaps as an alternative to maybe we should consider turning. Perhaps we should consider turning. I suppose as a substitute for I feel like we just need more time. I suppose I just need more time. Vast as in a vast field of grass.
With a vast land, population, and poverty.
Sheer as in the sheer bravery it took. Of course, as in, now of course this doesn't mean great many, as in there were a great many challenges instead of tons or a bunch. Naturally, as in naturally, I was inclined to say hello. Terribly, as in we were terribly anxious about the performance. Tremendously, as in the process was tremendously exciting.
He had tremendous courage.
Can we not, instead of why can't we? Can we not find a solution? Perhaps you're familiar with most of these. In fact, in some circumstances, I've employed one or two of these words and expressions and have been immediately called articulate. I'm still very much a work in progress. In fact, in the process of strengthening my own athleticism with language, I've been, over these last few months, writing software designed to help me collapse my thoughts into orderly, precise, articulate sentences. If you're interested in getting on the wait list for this tool, consider checking the first link below. And as always, thanks for watching.